Hi everyone. Firstly, I do want to say sorry for like a month without an episode. I went to Italy, I got back, I just had like a million things going on in my life at once. The last thing that I was thinking about was, what should I talk about in my podcast this week? However, today I had thoughts, so I thought I would make an episode today. And those thoughts are the fact that we so often second guess our own emotions or responses to situations that happen in our life. If we feel like other people disagree with how we feel or disagree with how we choose to handle something, don't deem our response necessary, I will make this make more sense. For example, like if something happens in your life that hurts your feelings or that isn't okay with you, and you decide to handle it in a certain way, or you decide to express your feelings, or maybe tell them it's not okay, or you decide it's not that deep, whatever. Often when you talk to someone about a situation and how you decided to handle it or how you felt about it, people will turn their nose up at it or be like, oh, I think that was a bit dramatic, or, oh, I would have done more. I would have, that wouldn't be okay with me. You should say something. It can be either end of the spectrum of like, you underreacted or you overreacted. And quite often that can make us second guess our response and our emotion to something, right? We kind of look to other people. It's like a validation that we're reacting reasonably to things. However, I was thinking sometimes, like, I feel like a lot of the time we overdo that. I know I have, where I've had situations and I've felt something, and because somebody else wouldn't feel that or somebody else would react differently, I've not acted in a way that's authentic to me, or I've not really done what I felt I needed to do, if you know what I mean. Like, whether it's like a friend doing something that to you feels like, I've had that before a few times, where it feels like I wouldn't do that to a friend. That feels to me like not something that I am comfortable, having in a friendship. I'm not okay. That doesn't sit right with me. I don't like that in a friendship. And I'll turn to people in my life and I'll speak to them, even though I know how I feel and maybe what I want to do about it. I would talk to other people and then kind of get swayed or like end up pandering to other people's opinions of how they would handle it, right? Because it feels like, I don't know, I guess as people we can often be like, have this fear that we're like unreasonable or too much, or like, I don't know, we feel like other people know how to handle things better than we do, even though they don't all the time, especially if it's for your life. Obviously, the choices that you make in your life you have to live with, not them. So really, you're the best judge at what you should do. But I feel like a lot of the time we do end up like changing how we handle situations, which obviously sometimes to confide in someone and then alter what, how you want to handle something, that's not always a bad thing. But I've noticed that in my life, I think I have overdone that, and I have second guessed like how I want to handle situations or what reaction I deem necessary, right? Something might be a big deal to me and like a deal breaker in a friendship or in a relationship, just anything. And, I speak to someone and they're like, I feel like that's like human and normal, and I wouldn't deem that a deal breaker. And I'm like, oh, okay. I feel like that's caused me to like underreact and overreact to situations quite a lot of the time because I'm going off as someone else's emotional threshold. And that's the thing, like, this is just something I've been thinking about recently. I feel like it's come up a few times in my life, and now I'm like, I've realised the importance of acknowledging that every single person has their own like individual emotional threshold and their own tolerances for what's okay and what's not, or what's a deal breaker or what's not, or how they're happy to be treated or how they're not. Like we all choose to like self-govern our lives in different ways, and it's, affected by so many things, like what we want from our lives, how we grew up. Like some people are really used to suppressing how they feel, and therefore if you say, oh, this has happened to me and I'm not okay with it and I'm gonna set a boundary, some people might be like, whoa, like I wouldn't do that, I would just like, not bring it up, like it's not that deep. But that's not necessarily like what you should do. And like I always think it's best to take anyone's advice on your life or anything with a grain of salt, because people speak through their own opinions and biases and lenses and whatever. But I've realized with this, it's something that I think really gets to us. Like if something hurts us, or we want to respond to something, there's just some sort of emotional situation going on in our life, we get really easily swayed, I think, by how people think that we should respond to it. Because I think, like I said, I think a lot of us have this like deep down thing of like, am I being dramatic? Am I being too much? I know that I have experienced that a lot. So it's like some things maybe, other people give advice and I'm like, I don't really care. But when it comes to things like this, it really can change how we react and cause us to, respond to things in ways that aren't authentic to us, to let things slide that we actually like, that don't sit right with us. Just because it might sit right with one of your friends, it doesn't necessarily mean you benefit from it or it's the right decision for you. But I do think it can be like particularly hard with things like this because, like I said, everyone is coming from a different bias. Someone might hate any excess drama from how they grew up and maybe their house was like very like, don't say what you think, don't say how you feel. So, maybe, some people don't really have they want everything to be peaceful all the time. They just want to keep the peace, and that person will probably turn their nose up a bit if you're like someone who is a bit more boundaried or doesn't want to let certain things slide, but some people love drama and some people are like, oh, you should do this, you should say that, blah, blah, blah. I think we forget that people judge you and your opinion, and we judge other people and their opinion based on our own individual emotional bandwidth, which is so subjective and personal. And I think recently I've really been trying to validate my own emotions and what reaction I deem necessary to certain things, whether people around me agree or not. Because I think I've realised that's something that's really gotten under my skin a lot in the past, and recently I'm kind of like clocking onto it. And I guess it comes down to what I talk about frequently of like, you do hit a point in your life, I think, as you become an adult where you have to become your own compass for your decisions. When things come up, turning inward a bit to decide how you want to handle something or where you want to go from there, rather than to other people for validation. It's so hard though. You do have to hit a point where you don't need people to say, yeah, I think you're being reasonable, that's what I would do too in that situation. You have to hit a point where like, even if everyone around me, but it's so tricky because some people hear this and they're like just unreasonable people, and then they over justify their actions. It is a spectrum where like you don't really want to be too far either end, because there are people, we all know people that just act horribly and will think like, it's a boundary, it's self-care, it's self-love, but it's like you're just being a horrible, inconsiderate person, and some people don't have enough boundaries at all and are too open and let people walk all over them, and you don't really want to be either end. It's tricky because becoming your own kind of validator in your experience in life and becoming your own self-government with decisions that you make, in order to do that responsibly, you kind of need to be emotionally intelligent enough. Do you know what I mean? Like, you kind of need to be self-aware enough and objective enough, if you know what I mean. It's a really tricky kind of tightrope, because I feel like I'm someone who's fairly emotionally intelligent in a way that I feel that's kind of bit me in the ass, because I can see every single perspective. I can empathize with everyone in every situation. I can kind of see where anyone would be coming from, no matter how insane or horrible someone might be being. I can still see things from their perspective and why maybe they might be that way, because I'm someone who, I have worked quite hard on being fairly emotionally intelligent, do you know what I mean? And that's a good thing. However, it can cause me to then kind of give everyone the benefit of the doubt and play devil's advocate constantly, to the point where I'm invalidating my own pain or my own experiences. It kind of feels like an empathy burnout, where it's like, because I can see everyone else's perspective and I can kind of see where they might be coming from, I can justify someone else's shitty actions towards me or anyone. In a weird way in my head, I can kind of see where they're coming from, and that maybe they're not meaning that, because maybe they're not. I'm like so good at seeing every perspective, to the point where like I almost overcorrected, and like I would have situations happen that don't feel okay to me, but I would kind of not necessarily do as much about it, because I'm like, but they've got this going on, and like, I know they've had this situation happen, and I know that this is something they struggle with, and I know that it's not probably intentional, and we're all human, and blah. Like, I'm so fucking good at that, and that is not a good thing. It is a good thing, but it needs to be like wrangled. That skill needs to be wrangled, otherwise you can end up not looking after yourself. And I think that's something that I've done a lot of, is like, I've had situations where people have, for example, wronged me in some way, shape or form, and I've like underreacted, that's the thing, or like downplayed how I feel in the end, because I'm like, but they didn't mean it. Up in situations where if someone wrongs you or someone hurts you're always downplaying your emotions, you're always kind of underreacting, and I don't know, I do feel like being able to empathize with everyone can cause you to not really set boundaries, because you can kind of like justify anything and everything, and that has been my problem in the past. But then, like I said, there is another end of the spectrum where some people can't justify or see someone else's perspective at all. Some people don't even try. Some people will have their emotional experience, have their response, feel the way they feel to the stimulus of whatever that is, whatever has happened, and go completely off of that and not give anyone any benefit of the doubt or consider where anyone else might be coming from. And that's also not a good way to be, because that's a good way to lose, a lot of relationships, and also a way to never grow, because you're never wrong in that. Do you know what I mean? You're never going to be the person in the wrong if that's how you go through your life. You're never going to be the person to have to take any accountability or ever have to say sorry or ever. Yeah, you can't grow if you're always the one who's right in everything, and that's as far as you look. So, but it's tricky, because as much as that person thinks they're always right, and then we'll just go off of that, not considering anyone else. The other end of the spectrum, where like I have more laid, is I can always make myself feel like I'm the one who's done something wrong, because I can always see where people are coming from, if that makes sense. Even if it's like you've been like, I've had situations where people have been completely like insanely like, what? And I'll be like, oh, was it me? Like, was it me? Because I know that they think that, and I can explain myself into thinking that I've done something and I should apologise. There needs to be a middle ground, because like I said, as much as it's good to be self-aware and stuff, you do need to be able to wrangle that in and actually not downplay how you feel all the time, and not always think that, you've fucked up or you've done something. You need to be able to set boundaries too, and I think that's where I've gone wrong. Because like I said, I've had situations where maybe something happens with a friend where I'm like, okay, I wouldn't do that, I wouldn't act like that, I wouldn't behave like, I would never do that to a friend. Maybe they're coming from here and this and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, I don't want that in a friend, and that's okay. I don't have to have no response to everything that happens. I don't have to play devil's advocate with everything. I don't have to empathize with everyone's experience and therefore not do anything. I can empathize and be like, I can see where they might be coming from, but it's still not be okay with me, and it still be perhaps a friendship that doesn't work for me anymore, or a friendship that I need to have a conversation in, or whatever, like, whatever response you deem necessary or appropriate, and validating that that's necessary, and validating that your emotions and your desire to handle it that way is valid and okay. If someone's done something or something's happened in your life, something doesn't even really need to have happened. Maybe your boyfriend or your girlfriend, whoever, you're like, this is something I'm actually not comfortable with, and although I know to the next person it's probably not a problem, if it is to you, then it is to you. And if you need to speak about it or not have that friendship or relationship, it so depends what's happened, then that's okay. Obviously, as long as you're not being a horrible person. I'm so aware that people like take advice with no grain of salt and just think, I can do whatever I want all the time, every single thing I do is valid, and like, I'm not speaking to these people. It's like, that's not my problem. Go to therapy perhaps, but I'm speaking to the people that are probably more on the side of not reacting and not responding because they feel like they're too much, or they're overdoing it, or it shouldn't be a problem, or it's better to just keep quiet, or I can maybe make myself feel comfortable with it. You do have to hit a point where you can actually acknowledge in yourself how you feel and validate that. It doesn't matter if other people think it's too much, or if other people disagree with how you feel or how you feel you should handle it. It doesn't matter. What matters is that you're comfortable in your own life and you're not pretending to be okay with things that you're not, and I think especially people who, like I said, are more of a people pleasery type or have been in the past, it's very easy for someone to hurt you and you just not say anything. You just not do anything because of whatever reason. You don't want to rock the boat. You think it's dramatic. You think, I'd rather just keep the peace, stay friends with these people. Some people just want everyone to kind of be civil and like them, and that's more important than honouring how they actually feel. Everyone's very different. Like I said, everyone's emotional bandwidth is very different. Hence why when you go to this person about how you feel about a situation, their response is going to be different if you go to someone else. Everyone's biased, and you do have to become your own compass of like, what's appropriate to me? Where are my limits? Where are my boundaries? And when do I want to speak up? When is it a deal breaker? Like, and not needing people to validate and back up and agree that that's okay and that you're allowed to do that. You're allowed to do that. That's so like ironic because I'm then giving you you don't need permission from me or from anyone. But it is something I've really been enjoying kind of noticing how I handle that, and if certain things happen in my life. I'm not gonna lie, I found it quite empowering to actually practice a little bit more saying how I actually feel, and when I'm actually not okay with something, just honouring that and expressing that nicely. It feels so much nicer to actually live in alignment with what you're comfortable with and what feels right to you, rather than suppress it. And I know this sounds so obvious, because of course it would be, but when you're someone who has pandered to other people quite a lot, or felt too difficult doing that or too much doing that, blah, 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 it's very refreshing. I'm not gonna lie, I'm really enjoying how refreshing it feels to actually acknowledge things. Like I said, if something happens in a relationship or in a friendship where you're like, I would never do that, and that's not okay with me, and that's not a friendship that I respect or I want, or like I would never pull that on someone, or I don't agree with that, and that's kind of, that really, if I'm being honest with myself, has kind of ruined a friendship or has kind of ruined a relationship or whatever. Acknowledge that, you know? Because sometimes that's necessary. Sometimes people are shit and you need to be able to walk away. And I'm really enjoying how refreshing it feels to actually do what feels right to me in situations, and not make myself kind of stay in friendships or situations where I don't feel good, or I don't feel respected, or I don't feel, you know, like it's genuine or two-sided, or whatever the situation is. Like, I rarely take things personally. Is that true? I don't know. I feel like I generally just have like an objective view of like, people respond, it's like a reflection of them, what people do most of the time, because I think that's true. Like 90% of the time how people respond or act is nothing to do with you, and I think that's true, and that's great. Kind of level of a healthy detachment to have that does serve me in ways. However, I've come across so many people in my life who are so the other end of the spectrum, and will like just not talk to me about things, or you know, one little thing goes wrong and we're not friends anymore, this, that, the other. Like, people that just are so the opposite in my kind of mentality, that it's quite refreshing to actually step a little bit more into the middle of that spectrum. And, you know, I still take things with a grain of salt, and I'm still a patient person with people. Like, I would hate to be one of those people that's just like, ew, I don't like that in the friendship, so I'm never doing that. If I ever do that, shoot me, because like, that's just not a life I want for myself. But it's nice to be practicing being a little bit more in the middle. Like I know this is like, wow, 22-year-old girl discovers boundaries. Like, this is not groundbreaking, but for me, like, I don't know, I feel like I've been on a journey in terms of like self-development for a while, and working on, you know, certain areas or certain like corners of boundaries, and coming into myself and being more myself and whatever. And I think just right now, my particular like little corner of focus at the moment in my self-development journey is this, you know, and I've focused on different areas of, you know, coming into myself a bit more and having more boundaries, and looking at how I respond to things, how I feel about things, whatever. Self-introspection in many different ways. And I think at the moment, this is it. Like, specifically, this little corner of boundaries is my current focus. Like, when something happens in my life, a situation comes up, I feel something towards something, I'm gonna decide how I want to handle that and how that makes me feel, and validate that. And sure, I can talk to people about it, but if someone says like, you know, I don't know if that's necessary, but I can listen to that, I can consider it, but I am self-governing my own decisions and the relationships I want to have, and what's okay with me and what's not, and how I want to handle these things. Do you know what I mean? Learning to self-validate, not self-indulge, because that's a different thing. Maybe I'll make a different episode about that. But to self-validate and look inwards for what actually feels okay with me and what doesn't, regardless of if the next person thinks they would put up with that or they wouldn't. Doesn't matter. Maybe I'm putting up with something right now that someone's like, why are you doing that? That would never work for me. Okay, maybe it works for me. Maybe it's fine for me, and maybe I don't care. You know, that's my current little niche of boundaries that I'm working on, and I feel like it's really fucking refreshing. Hence why I'm making an episode, because, like I said, I think a load of people err towards the keeping the peace, maybe, or just struggle setting boundaries, maybe, or maybe you're too nice. A lot of the time, it's people that are just too nice. It could be anything. It really could be anything. It could be how you grew up. Who knows? Probably. Everything comes back to that, but yeah, I think it could be a helpful little thing to put out there for someone to ponder. You know, if something comes up in your life, do you look inwards? Do you even check in with how you feel and what, how would you like to handle this? Sometimes you have to give yourself a little bit of time to like digest and process something to work out how you want to handle it. But it's worth considering, like, do you give yourself a chance to do that? Do you give yourself a chance to check in with what feels appropriate to you? What response feels appropriate to what's happened before maybe consulting people in your life or even people close to you? Like, they're still going to have different thresholds to you and bandwidths emotionally. Even like your best friend or your boyfriend, like, you still don't have to take their opinion or their advice wholly just because like maybe they're similar to you. We're all different people and we all have to, like I said, live with our own choices and live with our own decisions. And even your boyfriend or your mum doesn't. You do. You have to live with it. So it is worth making choices that are actually authentic to you, not authentic to your boyfriend or your mum, because it's just going to feel grating inside of you if you're like in a friendship where you're like, I don't like this. I feel like you don't respect me. I feel like you pull things that I would never pull. I feel like you do things that I don't feel are okay, but I don't want to say anything because I feel like I'm being dramatic. Just, when you're ignoring what you really want to do. And I guess learning to self-validate is super important. Learning to make decisions without the approval of others sometimes is necessary. But yeah, thank you for listening. Hopefully this maybe planted a seed if you're someone who also needs to work on this. Or maybe you're the other side of the spectrum where you don't consult in anyone and you think you're always right and you just literally bulldoze through life. Maybe this will plant a seed in the other direction and maybe make you consider taking a beat before you act. I don't know.